Hello, this is Politics and Parenting, and I am your host, Jeff Mayhugh, where we talk about politics from the parent's point of view. Today, I'm joined by a very good friend, Matt Lewis. Matt Lewis is a columnist at the Daily Beast, the author of Filthy Rich Politicians and Too Dumb to Fail, and the host of Matt Lewis in the News YouTube channel. Matt, how are you doing today?
Hey, Jeff, doing great.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, anytime, especially the topic of fatherhood is so important. So happy to be here.
Yeah, so we've known each other for a few years now. We talk, we ramble a little bit about politics, we ramble a little bit about fatherhood, and that's kind of the concept of the show, right? Politics and fatherhood or parenthood. And I've always found you to be thoughtful and inspirational when it comes to these type of things. So I wanted to have you on the show and just kind of, for the listeners out there, for the common man that reads the insiders scoops, I think we always kind of want to know, like, how'd they get there? And Matt, how'd you get there? Where you come from, man?
I come from a really small little place in Western Maryland called Wolfsville, Maryland. My dad was a prison guard for 30 years in Hagerstown, Maryland, and he was the inspiration of my life. He was interested in politics and ideas. And he turned me on to that. And so, my dad and my mom both thought it was really important that I go to college. I think they made a lot of sacrifices so that I always joke when I give speeches that my dad voluntarily went to jail for 30 years so I could get paid to write about politics and talk about politics. But it's sort of true. So I went to a little college called Shepherd College. It's now Shepherd University in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, and came out of there really pretty aimless. I hadn't done a single internship, never volunteered on a political campaign, and I just sort of lucked into volunteering on a campaign. And that led me through a bizarre series of circumstances, but ultimately, I wasn't cut out to be a political campaign guy. There's like a certain type of guy who is cut out for that lifestyle. I was a little more contrarian, a little more artistic than that, maybe a little more sensitive. And so writing about politics became kind of my passion. I finally found my niche at probably around the age of 30, a little bit later than most people. So it's been great. And I tell you, as a dad, getting to have a job. And I know there are a lot of journalists who work long hours and who travel a lot. But I was able to kind of, at this point in my life, carve out a job where I do mostly opinion analysis and commentary. So I'm home a lot at my computer, writing and hanging out with my kids. So it's really been a blessing.
So you kind of mentioned it there, talking about the sacrifices that your parents made for you to get to college and inspiring you, right? Like, giving you a different path than they had. I think a lot of parents, it's very natural for a father to teach his son what he knows, because that's probably just the easiest thing to teach, right? It's probably harder for a father to encourage a son to go out on a path that he doesn't know. It's probably a little bit scary.
Yeah.
It sounds like your parents did that. How did they help you really, reach this new path?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Jeff, because by and large, my dad really is responsible. He was a dreamer. He didn't get to achieve all of his dreams, but some of them I think he has through me. So he instilled this ability to dream and to be interested in ideas and politics. That comes from him. But I have to, it is interesting, though, because at a certain point after, he put me through 6 years of college. Now, granted, I only have a 4-year degree. I was living in his basement, playing in a rock band. I finally graduated from college, and I'm managing a fast food restaurant. And I ended up, I went to volunteer on this campaign, and this young guy running for state senate in Frederick, Maryland, where I was from, made me his campaign manager. And that really began to turn my life around. But I remember after I had worked on this campaign, it was successful. We had my candidate was 26 years old. We beat a 16-year incumbent. And my candidate wanted me to do an internship at this great place called the Leadership Institute. Jeff, you've been there. They do amazing training. And I ended up working there for 4 years. But my candidate wanted me to do that. He wanted me to do this internship. And at this point, my dad, who I think had put up with 6 years of me living in his basement, playing in rock bands, really was strongly encouraging me to sell life insurance, which is
Hmm.
something and my mom wanted me to take some tests to become like a postal delivery guy or something. And so there was a point where even my parents were like, okay, dude, we've put up with a lot of this. It's time for you to actually become an adult, get a real job. But I did, man. I joined the circus and and went into politics. And so even I think my parents, who did a lot of things right about instilling dreams and interests in me, at a certain point, they wanted me to do kind of what they were comfortable with. You know, my dad had been an insurance salesman. He did it on the side when he wasn't working at the prison. And thank God I didn't. Sometimes you don't want to take your parents' advice. You know, I think parents, Jeff, as a parent myself, I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. This is something I'm cognizant of. Um, Parents are wiser typically than kids. They have a lot more knowledge than kids, but it's in their interest. It's in my interest as a dad for my kids to kind of play it safe and do the conservative, safe thing. And sometimes kids need to take a big chance. I think my parents felt like I'd sort of used up all of my all of my opportunities for that with the many years it took me to get through college. But the truth is, thank God that I didn't take my dad's advice at that point. And the reason I didn't is because this candidate, Alex Mooney, who's now my congressman in West Virginia, surprisingly,
Wow.
but at this point, he's 26 years old, and he looked at me and he said, Matt, let me tell you something. If you want to be an insurance salesman, go ahead and do that. But if you don't do this internship at the Leadership Institute, you're an idiot. And I am so grateful that he was so brazen. I mean, if he had been polite, if he had said, hey, man, either way could be good, we'll be in touch, I probably would be selling life insurance today. But
Mm.
he looked at me and said, you do what you want. He's like, you've got the rest of your life to sell out and to take a safe bet. If you don't do this internship, you're an idiot. Thank God. He was so brazen that I'm like, this guy, he just got elected. I better take his advice. And it worked.
That's a fantastic story. You know what it reminds me of? You watch Seinfeld, right?
Oh,
I know you. Yeah.
I love
So
Seinfeld.
you remember the episode where Jerry bounces a check, but he doesn't. So his parents think he's on like he's having income issues, and
Yes.
they're like, take the Macy's executive position or something like that. They're
Yep.
trying to get him to like give up comedy and move on to something. But meantime, he's like a big time comedian. His parents like
Yes.
have really no idea. That's like it's very similar, you know? Like it must be how all parents think at some point in time is like, I love my kid. I just want them to be safe. I want them to
Yep.
chase their dreams, but at the end of the day, not everybody can attain all your dreams. Sometimes you have to take the safe bet to and pass it along to the next generation, you know?
Totally. And as a dad who went through that myself, being introspective, I know that this is a weakness I will have. And so while I will try to guide my kids and caution them from, trying to buy some magic beans and, some stupid thing that would be a waste of their time, I also need to be cognizant of the fact that I am biased toward safety and security. And if they go out and make a mess, I'm probably gonna have to clean it up. So I have an incentive for them to make safe choices. And it may not always be the best thing for them. And if you're ever gonna, when you're young is the time
Mm-hmm.
to take big swings and to try to move to LA and try to become a famous actor, whatever you want to do, whatever your
Right.
passion is, your dream is. And there are a lot of people who don't do it, who don't live their dream or at least try. And then they hit middle age and they're resentful and regretful and angry about that. And they have the midlife crisis, We don't want
Yeah.
that either.
Well, I think about it, and you use the word dreams, and I think it's important to dream. I think what, for me as a father, what I try to push my kids is to be ambitious, right? If you've got a dream, that's great, but if you're ambitious about the dream, you're laying the foundation to be successful for it. And, sometimes it's hard as a parent to understand what that foundation is and to understand if your child's actually building it or actually just chasing dreams. But, I'm a Madison guy, so ambition must be made to counteract ambition, right?
Yes. And I mean, I went through a series of dreams. I wanted to be a professional baseball player. I wanted to be, I was really into karate. I took it for 5 years and, did the tournaments and all that stuff. Was That was sort of the focus of my life for 5 years. And then I played in rock bands, and we played at like the Philadelphia Music Conference, which is now defunct, but it was, kind of a big, not quite South by Southwest, but it was pretty cool. So did it somewhat seriously, and ended up, then I thought it was going to be campaigns, but it ended up being writing about politics. So it took me a series of, I think if my parents had tried to stamp that out prematurely, it probably wouldn't have gone well. But I'm grateful that there is a point where you do need to give up on dreams and
Mm.
quit, where it's just, it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to make it. I'll put it to you this way: it's like if you are the 100th best political writer in America, you could probably eke out a living. If you're the 100th best pitcher, I don't know, maybe you're in the bullpen somewhere, but you're not, you might have a couple seasons if you're lucky, and then what do you do, right? So there's some careers that are more conducive, I think, to survival than other dreams.
Yeah, I think it's about opportunity, right? There's more opportunities to write than there is Major League Baseball teams. And
Yeah.
so like it's just a numbers game at that point. And how much work
Karate's
are
even
you
the better example. If you're the 100th best kickboxer in America, you're a bad ass, but I'm not sure you can monetize that unless you start teaching it, and that's a different game.
Well, and it's funny because I have you mentioned kind of your dreams, baseball player, musician. I have an oldest son who is chasing his musician dream. He's playing in a band, he's teaching guitar, right? And then a younger son who's playing baseball, and they both like have these dreams that they want to do it. And I just tell them both and be like, for my older one, I'm really happy that while he is playing a band, he's also teaching because, like you
Yes.
mentioned, maybe you can't monetize being a successful karate play, I don't even what player. What do you call a karate person?
Dude.
Maybe you can't successfully monetize that, but you can teach it and you can monetize that. And same thing
Yeah.
for music is like learn the thing that you love and then learn how to create a business around it, and that way you can be successful going forward no matter what.
And you never know what lessons you learn along the way.
Mm.
Interestingly, all those years I was playing in bands, which you might see as like a misspent youth, wasted time, but I was learning how to perform in public, which I now do. Like if I go on
Mhm.
TV or give a speech or something, I was learning, we were writing songs. I was learning how to collaborate with other people and get along with them. And I do that now, whether I'm working with editors or co-authors or what have you. It's writing a book certainly is a collaboration. There were a lot of people who helped me write my latest book, Filthy Rich Politicians. Just so many of the things that you do. How about promoting? I learned quickly that it didn't matter how good you were as a musician if nobody came to your gig. So a big part of my job was public relations. Back then it was a mailing list and putting out flyers and getting people to show up at your shows to support you. Well, I mean, as a writer, a lot of what I do now is promoting the things that I write. So turns out a lot of the lessons I learned with music, they were transferable. And
Mhm.
so my parents might have viewed it as wasted time in my misspent youth, but actually I was training for a lot of the things I'm doing today.
Yeah, I mean, there is, in my opinion, there really is no misspent time or wasted dreams. There's just lessons to be learned for the next season,
Yep.
Um, so we talked about father, we talked about your parents. Like, what what do you love about being a father? Right? Like because there's a lot of negatives to being a dad. Let's face it. We don't necessarily want to talk about them all the time, but kids can be challenging. But there's so much upside and joy to being a father. What particular do you love about it?
I'd say a few things. One, kind of from a deep philosophical standpoint, there's really not much you can do in life that's going to impact the world more than having kids. Um, if I am lucky, I will write something that somebody will remember 50 years from now. That's probably not going to happen, to be honest. Like, um, you could be a prominent. I mean, there are people when I was a kid who were very prominent political journalists who were very well known. That like, do you know who Jack German is? You ever heard of Jack German?
Mm-mm.
Classic example. Um, he was a big time writer for what used to be an important paper, the Baltimore Sun. He actually lived in Charlestown, West Virginia, because he wanted to be close to the racetracks. Later in his life, he moved out to West Virginia, right near where I live. But he used to be on the McLaughlin Group with Pat Buchanan and
Oh,
Eleanor
okay.
Clift. So he was one of the most important political journalists in America. And today, nobody knows who he is. And so I don't have a lot of illusions. I hope that I would do something meaningful that would be remembered, but it's much more likely that something like that my kids are and their kids will be the legacy. And so if you care at all, I mean, and as a Christian, I actually believe that the more important thing is the spiritual, but if you care at all about this temporal world and making an impact, nothing more important than your kids in terms of a lasting impact. Probably very few of us will do anything in our work that will outlast that. So there's a purposeful, meaningful sort of part to it. The other thing is that they they um, they force me to. If I did, there are things I know about myself that I would not know if I didn't have kids.
Ooh.
Watching them go through the same struggles I had or different struggles, seeing how I am able or not, how I am effectively or not able to help guide them. It's a big. It says it helps me learn about my growth, and then also it forces me to learn things I wouldn't otherwise learn. So, for example, um, my sons, they have different interests, and I really believe it's important. Whatever they're interested in, if they're really interested in something, I have to become interested in it. And so my one son is really into anime. And I used to think it was really stupid. Now there's some anime I really like. We watch it together. I would have never known about that stuff if it wasn't for him. And now I'm really grateful. It's made me a more interesting, knowledgeable person. Um, and it's not just anime. There's a whole bunch of things like that. And I would even say, uh, my one son is such a techie. He has now improved my what I'm doing in terms of video and YouTube's and my podcasting. So we've now gotten to the point where he is way better at computers and stuff like that than I am. And so that's something that we have together. So I found it to be really rewarding overall for a bunch of reasons.
I I absolutely love that answer, because I find that so true. There was we video Christmas, or at least we did when we were younger with the kids, and I remember at the time, like, my middle kids were like 2 or 3 or maybe 4, and we videoed Christmas, and at that time period, I had noticed that my kids used the word goodness all the time. Goodness, goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And I thought it was a strange, I didn't know where it came from. And I watched back Christmas video, and then I realized it was me. I was saying it over and over and over again, and I had no idea that I was saying it. And literally from that moment, I looked at fatherhood differently. And I did exactly what you're talking about. Is like, these kids know me better than I know myself, and I can learn about me and grow my person to be a better role model for them through watching them and through understanding what they're going through. And again, to your point about, like, and we kind of talked about it earlier with, like, it can be scary as a father or a parent to send your kid on a path that you don't know. And you're talking about anime and tech, and then you have to have faith in your kid, believe that they're going to be able to figure things out, and then it expands your knowledge. Like you mentioned being, a Christian, and I'm also a Christian, and the way that I've kind of come to think about things is like, I'm my children's father, but ultimately we're all brothers in Christ, right? And we're able to we can all learn from each other, whether it's a kid or an adult. There's always something to be learned and to grow from.
Absolutely. Look, and I will say that there are people who I don't want to shame anybody or judge any of the people who can't have kids or people who don't want to have kids, and frankly probably shouldn't if they don't want to. But just speaking for myself, and I don't think that I would have ever. There are things. There's growth that's taken place in me that would never have happened without being a father.
Hmm.
And so, if you want to talk about sort of the full human experience and actualization, um, it has forced me to be introspective and to gain wisdom that I do not think there's any way I could have gotten in any other capacity.
Yeah. No, same here. So that brings me to my next question. What has father and you kind of answered part of this already, but what has fatherhood taught you about life and most importantly, leadership?
Um, well, I'll tell you one. I mean, this isn't the best answer, maybe, but this is an interesting thing that I've learned. As we're recording this, there are these protests going on in college campuses, and generally, I think that they were allowed to metastasize because there wasn't leadership. That there should have been clear rules, and those rules should have been enforced quickly and vigorously. And I think that's true. But there is an argument for, if you think about counterinsurgency strategy and kind of winning hearts and minds. And I don't see my sons as the enemy or anything like that. But I'll tell you, I mean, I've got two sons, and one of them responds very well to what I just described. I call it the Patrick Swayze philosophy of life, from Roadhouse. Be nice until it's time to not be nice. So my youngest son responds very well to that. We're going to have clear rules, and overall, we're going to have a nice, fun environment. But if you cross the line, you know the rules, and there will be a punishment. My older son did not respond to that, and if I didn't have kids, or when I was younger and I didn't have kids, if I saw a child misbehaving, my assumption was those parents just, they don't have control over their household. I could get that kid too, but these must be liberal parents who they let their kids run amok. Maybe or maybe not. Some kids are different. And so with my older son, getting him to respond, if you try to come down on him, it doesn't work. You could not intimidate him. You could not threaten him. It will not get you the right results. The sort of old school conservative, it just doesn't work. You need to treat him the way that you would treat like an adult employee, which is get him to buy in on it. And hey, man, I remember when I used to work at restaurants, my favorite managers weren't the mean guys yelling at me, telling me what to do. They'd be, hey, Matt, would you do me a favor and go back? Do me a favor, man. I'm swamped out here. Would you go get me something out of the freezer? That kind of thing. He'll pretty much do whatever you want if you kind of win him over, win hearts and minds, and kind of it's like soft power. And so I think that is part of leadership is recognizing that your followers are not all the same, that they will that some of them will respond to different stimuli, and it is your job as the leader to figure out how to get them to do not just what you want them to do, which that's part of it, but get them to do what they ought to be doing, what's good for them as well.
No, that's really interesting. I kind of talk about that with my kids. I break the two different like groups down into like it's a communication thing. It's how people hear and outwardly communicate with each other, and actively or passively. And the active communicators are typically a little bit more rebellious. They typically want to be included. They want to be asked to do something as opposed to told to do something. And so it's really important in recognizing, because if you have a passive communicator and you ask them to do something, they might just ignore you and be like, well, why didn't you just tell me to do it? I would have done it if you told me to do it, but the active communicator is the completely opposite, right? And as a parent or a leader in any circumstance, I think your role as the leader is to actually recognize, like you said, the followers and how they respond to different types of encouragement or punishment. and then to be able to shape yourself into a way where you can bring them on board with you, and make them want to do the work. That's the thing. I've got twin girls, and my wife bakes and cooks in the kitchen all the time. And, sometimes the girls will want to do too much in the kitchen. And, she'll get a little frustrated and try to like push them out. And I'll go back and be like, hey, babe, just remember the fact that they want to be there is a good thing. Give them something to do that makes them busy. Like it doesn't even have to help you at the moment. Just don't discourage them from wanting to help, because that's a good thing to have in a person, and it'll make them more successful in the future.
Amen. Well said. No, and I think that's important. And it's not only is it important, it is just vital, because it's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. If you are operating under the assumption that like the Marine drill instructor model is the way to go, you could have a household that is in constant turmoil and bitterness and disarray, because you're applying that method to a kid that will not respond to it. And so I have two kids, same exact environment, same exact genetic, all that stuff, same parents, entirely different in terms of how to motivate them.
Yeah. I've got a lot of kids from different parents, and it's the same way. So let's get a little bit into like the politics aspect of parenting, right? Because you kind of mentioned about the legacy that maybe you leave for your kids, being really important. Having a safe environment when you're gone is really important. And right now, as we look at around the world, there's escalating conflicts between Russia and Ukraine, Israel and Iran, China and Taiwan. As a father, are you concerned about your children's future?
No, not at all. And I think part of it is I think so. First of all, to be a someone who does what I do, which is write about politics, but write about what's happening in the world. It could be a school shooting that's dominating the conversation, and I have to write about that, or it could be Gaza. You have to have a certain detachment where you can't you have to be compassionate and knowledgeable, but also you can't let that dominate yourself. So I believe the whole work as if it all depends on you, pray as if it all depends on God thing. So my attitude is work as if it all depends on you. So be involved in politics, teach your kids, don't hide it from them. Obviously, age appropriateness is important, but at a certain point, I talk to my kids about politics. I talk to them about what's going on in the world. I tell them about it, but I do not let fear factor into taking over my life or dominating my life or my thinking or the way that I approach life. I know there's some people who are like, how could you bring a child, the doomers, how could you bring a child into this world? And I hate that mentality. I don't adhere to that. And the other thing I would say is just kind of statistically speaking, we probably live in the safest, best time ever to be alive and ever to have kids. And it's sort of like, I tell my kids, like, we're driving to the airport. Statistically speaking, the most dangerous part about this flight will be the drive to the airport. You have nothing to fear. Or like going in the ocean. Like, your odds of being hit by lightning are probably greater than your odds of being eaten by a shark. And so I do think that when we are constantly in the news and we are watching carjackings in Washington, D.C., and people getting killed in wars and shootings, mass shootings and all of that, we don't want to become callous to it. But you also need to realize, like, just because you're seeing it on Twitter or, if this technology didn't exist, you might not even know about it. So don't let it, like, don't have an irrational sense that this is ubiquitous or pervasive.
No, that's a great answer. The technology makes the world feel smaller than it is, and the problems feel bigger than they are.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um,
And you and I, it's tough enough for us as adults to grapple with that, but it's really important to tell your kids to like put it in context for them.
Well, and you brought an interesting thing. You talk about the doomers that like don't want to have children and how it's probably safer to have children now than ever before. It's easier to have children now than ever before. And I, big history guy, read a lot of stories. Thomas Jefferson's story up there has always stuck out to me because he had 7 children, only 2 of them made it to adulthood. He lost his wife during that process after their last child was born. And I think about all the people that are like, I'm not going to bring a kid into the world. It's so dangerous. And I'm like, but it's really not. If you really understand life and how fragile it is, it's actually quite easy to bring a child into the world. And yes, parenting is hard, and yes, parenting is difficult, but you wouldn't be here without it. And those problems that we see going on in the world, a lot of them can be solved with just more better prepared people, you know,
Amen.
more kids having children, more parents investing in their children, similar to the story that you told about your parents, is like understanding where you are in the world, being okay with it, working hard, and trying to provide the next generation a step up on the ladder.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure why, but something just popped in my head that's a little off topic, but there's a lot of people on the other side of this debate. There are people who say you should have kids, but you don't need to pay so much attention to them. This is kind of like a libertarian argument, which is like you should have a lot of kids, but you don't need to like watch them that closely. Just sort of let them free range roam. And I don't entirely agree with that philosophy either. I do like, to me, having kids and growing my kids are my most important. And I view being a husband as part of this, by the way.
Yes.
But that role as husband and father is my most important job, and I really enjoy it and I really take it seriously. So I get the point. You don't need to sign your kids up for every traveling team. They don't, you don't have to like buy them the most expensive sneakers or whatever. So I get you can go too far with it, and that's a disincentive to having kids. If you're constantly traveling, taking them to, they're playing on 5 different baseball teams, like that is a disincentive to having a lot of kids. But I also don't like the idea that you shouldn't be like, that you could just sort of put them on autopilot, because like I do think it's important to really invest in them, and like I know you think deeply about this. And one thing that I've learned from you, Jeff, is, and this goes into the anime thing a little bit. I remember, I think it was your daughter who wanted you to read a book one time, and you said that, of course, you did it, and you said that like that is, if someone invites you into their world, what they're reading, what they're interested in, that is the greatest compliment in the world.
Yeah. Dude, you're gonna get me crying now. I remember that moment too. I remember that moment. That was it was with my oldest daughter. I remember that book, and I remember reading that book. The father figure in that book sounded a lot like me. And I asked her after reading the book, like, what did you think about the characters? Da da da. And eventually it came out that she also thought the father figure was like me, which made me feel good because he was a good father figure.
There you go.
You never really know what your kids are thinking about you, do you?
I know. Yeah, it's I think so. I think of myself as being like 18. Um but I think I can tell from my kids that that they think of me as being maybe 70. And dude, yesterday, I think you probably saw on Facebook as we're recording this, yesterday was the 20th anniversary of the death of my father, which got me thinking a lot about it. And my dad died at the age of 56. And what that means is, in a few years, I will be older than my father ever was.
Mm,
And that is blowing my mind,
mm.
because he was a man. He was like an adult. And I could live to be 100. He will always be, in my mind, older than me.
Mm.
and tougher than me and wiser than me. It's a weird thing.
That's very interesting. I was just reading a Teddy Roosevelt biography, and his father died around the same age. And when Teddy was president, he reached his father's age, and that's the reflection that Teddy had as well.
What
I
did he
think
say?
I don't have it off the top of my head. But like in the story, he's kind of reflecting on his father being this larger than life figure. It was a big moment in his life when his father passed
Yeah.
away. He was I can't remember now because it's been a while since I read the intro biography, but he was in his like 30s or 40s. He was just getting into politics, just becoming successful, and it just kind of happened overnight. And then he also lost his wife very quickly,
Yeah.
either before or after that. So it was a difficult time for him. And just to think about, like, Teddy Roosevelt was a man's man, right? Like everybody saw Teddy as that, but in reality, Teddy was made fun of because he had glasses when he was a kid. He was kind of small. He had health issues. So he, like you, looked up at his father as a man's man. And he probably, like you, always saw him that way. And coming to that moment where you reach the age where your father passes and realize that, in a way, you've now surpassed him.
Mm-hmm.
There's a moment of like sadness and joy that goes along with that. The sadness is that your father didn't get to continue on, and the joy is the fact that what he gave you this moment. It's that step up on the ladder, right? It's that little bit extra that you get because your parents sacrificed for you.
Amen. It is weird.
So I know, right? So there's we talked about like the external conflicts that are happening in the world. There's like an internal conflict that's happening, and I'm 38, so I've grown up watching this internal conflict, like the evolution of the internet, the ability for kids to reach other forces that they or communicate with other people they would have never been able to communicate before. Again, the technology makes the world smaller, and so we're able to reach out more. And right now, there's a lot of talk about TikTok. There's a lot of talk about, internet censorship, or who should be allowed and who shouldn't be allowed to talk about it. And what the internet does in a lot of ways is it gives access for bad actors, foreign or otherwise, to reach our children. And you can be a parent, you can lock down your kids' phones or put apps on there, but they're going to ride the bus. They're going to be with other kids. They're going to see stuff that you can't control. What can we do as parents
Yeah.
to like help this?
And dude, I have to be careful because if I misbehave, my son will lock my computer down. My son is pretty close. I mean, he's a computer savant. He could if I misbehave, he actually could shut me down. So there's no me locking him out at this point. He could defeat it. Um, so he's 13, and yet he actually like has been for years now taking lessons on programming video games. So the idea that I could shelter him at this point is it would be World War III because it would be taking away like completely get rid of every piece of technology in this house. And yeah. So to me, I see it. You should have two different. I have like two tracks. Okay. At the macro level, as a citizen, as a columnist, and all of that, this is a serious problem. So I think we should be banned. I'm glad that we're banning. We're going to force the sale of TikTok. I think that's the right thing to do, right? Because it's just insane to let a foreign government own this company that could be simultaneously collecting data and feeding propaganda to the youths of America. It just seems like suicide that any nation would allow that to happen. So, from a public policy standpoint, I support efforts to crack down on this problem. That's track one, the macro level. I'm sorry, yeah, the macro level. At the micro level, as a father, I think what you need to do is what's age appropriate. Obviously, there was a time in my life where you shelter your kids and you put it guardrails in place. But my operating philosophy, I can't tell you the Bible verse, but the line is something like, "Be be gentle as doves, but wise as serpents." Maybe you know the verse better than I do. Be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. That's kind of my philosophy. Um, and I tell my kids, and if I ever opened a dojo, by the way, that I think I would find a way to make that like the logo and that to be actually the philosophy. Like Patrick Swayze, be nice until it's time to not be nice, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so with the kids, it's I want them to be street smart. I want them to be savvy. And I can't there's going to come a time when they turn 18. I will no longer be in charge of them to the degree that I am now, to the degree that you ever are in charge of anyone else. Um, and they're going to be on their own. And if I have not prepared them to be sophisticated consumers of technology, then I've not done my job. So like
Mm.
when they were little kids, we would if a TV commercial came on, I talked to them about like, they're trying to sell you something, right? They're not just saying this because they're nice people. They want you to buy that. So I would start to put in their minds, be skeptical, not cynical, but skeptical. Be a shrewd, be street smart, be wise as serpents. Um, and it's a process. But as we're watching TV, I'm constantly pausing. We have conversations about things that happen. So they're exposed. I don't shelter them. They're exposed to a
Mm.
lot of adult material, not adult material with
Right.
the quotes around it, but mature stuff. And I think that's appropriate that you sort of slowly expose them to ideas and thoughts and dangers, because otherwise, man, they're going to be vulnerable
Mm.
to these predators out there. Whether that's someone spamming you, trying to give you a computer virus, or trying to catfish you or trick you, whatever. It's a dangerous world out there. Absolutely.
Yeah. Providing your children with the opportunity to learn while they're young, to fail while they're young. Like I think
Yes.
that's the biggest thing is like everybody fails. And it's difficult sometimes for people to deal with failure. And it's also you don't necessarily know that you failed all the time if you get taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And so when they're young, having those conversations, allowing them to ask questions with you, because otherwise they're just going to ask questions to somebody else. They're just going to go somewhere else for that information if you aren't open and willing to have adult situations. I think the teenage years are the most important, obviously. Being able to, if you give your children enough guidance when they're young, you can allow them to have the freedom when they're a teenager to fail, and then you're still there to pick them up,
Yep.
before they go out on their own. So that failure is not as severe as if it would be when they're older.
Yeah.
Um,
You said something that I think is really important. And I'll put it in my own, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'll put it in my way. If you don't indoctrinate your kids, someone else will. It's not like the world is a vacuum. And if you let them out there on the internet or at school or wherever, they're going to find out for themselves. No, somebody will tell your kids what to think. It could be you, or it could be people who do not share your worldview, do not share your values. Um, by the same token, um, at some point, they may disagree with you, and that's cool too. But at
right.
least you have made your case to them, and they've begun with kind of the premise that you want them to begin with. And if they then disagree, especially when they're 18, hey, free country.
Yeah. Yeah. So, part of this, and you kind of already mentioned it with your answer with like the government should be allowed to force the sale of TikTok to an American owner or ban it in the country. And look, I agree with you as a parent. Like, I wholeheartedly agree with you. The thing that I've noticed about like the invention of technology and then like I guess the regulation that goes along with it. When television was invented, it was pretty strict as far as like what could be on there and what couldn't be on there. It seems like the leaders during that generation really understood how it could be used for negative shaping, children. And with the internet, it's been the wild, wild west. And I'm not for censorship. I'm not for, stopping people from free speech, but I do think there should be a safe place on the internet for your children to go. And I don't necessarily know if that exists right now. I'm not a techie guy, so like I don't know. Can we build another internet and make one that's just for kids? You know, that way kids don't have access to the same adult material that we have. Because, like you mentioned, your kids have now surpassed you in their tech knowledge. Even
Hmm.
you know, even if you were to lock it down or try to shelter them, you can't. And you
They
know,
would
like
shut
how?
me out as punishment.
Yeah,
They would turn off my internet,
and
cancel my, you know, yeah, it could be bad, definitely.
but like, don't people who create powerful institutions have an obligation to make sure that they are protected and aren't hurting others?
I think certainly a moral obligation. And, Jeff, I think that so much of what we are facing today as a country and in the world, really, it's a global thing, is the fact that it has now been so many years since World War II, since the Great Depression, since World War II. I think the reason that TV was the way it was that the government and the people who created our television were in the post World War II era. So they could easily imagine, like, what if Germany had tried to buy a TV channel? Would we have permitted that? No, we wouldn't. So, there were laws in place. And unfortunately, I'm a huge Ronald Reagan fan, but during his administration is when the deregulation of things like that started happening. And so, for example, Rupert Murdoch, who was Australian, I think just became an American citizen or something so he could uh, buy Fox News and not just Fox News, but Fox, which was a network, Married with Children, Simpsons, stuff like that. And then also obviously operating multiple newspapers. And I think some of that was a mistake. Some of the kind of neoliberal policies that Reagan and Clinton supported have turned out to be a mistake. And I think at this point now, we're so far removed from the Great Depression and World War II that sadly, I think we're going to have to relearn. We're going to have to remake some of those same mistakes and relearn some of those same lessons, because ain't very many people alive who remember those days actually.
Yeah, you make a really good point. It's actually I just took my twins over to see my grandmother, their great grandmother, who was alive during that time period, and I take the time to ask her questions like, "Where did you grow up? How was life like back then?" And so my kids can hear that, so they can understand. Like my my kids are so spoiled, like they have no idea. And I'm sure my parents said the same thing about me when I was young, and I'm sure it was true, you know. And but it's really important to me to understand, like, being spoiled is not necessarily a bad thing. Being spoiled means that your family has worked hard and you've been able to provide. But you shouldn't forget those lessons. You know, those lessons are really, really important to maintain stability in your family, in your country, in the world, you know?
Absolutely. Um, yeah, I think so. We're taking our kids out to lunch with my wife's granddad, who's he'll be 102 in May. He actually served in World War II for Canada, which was under the Crown. Um, his brother was shot down over Berlin and died. Like, hasn't seen him in 80 years or however long it's been. It's
Mm.
insane. And still will cry when you mention it. I mean, can't blame him. But pretty soon we're not going to have any connection to that generation. And those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I do fear that even it's like Donald Trump's even invocation of like words like America first are just an example of how we have forgotten history, because that used to be the context of that term was very loaded, including, like, isolationism and even anti-Semitism. And the fact that it's now been rebranded,
Mm.
and probably most people who use the term do not even realize that the connotation that it conjures.
Charles Lindbergh, right? Charles
Yes.
Lindbergh, yeah. And I think there's a Henry Cabot Lodge was a senator at that time frame, and I don't know if he was an America First guy, but I know he was an isolationist. Um, and there's a lot to be said about like staying out of foreign conflicts, but
Yeah.
there's another thing to be said about supporting the wrong side of a foreign conflict.
And there were good people who went on to change their mind and
Right.
to post World War II. In fact, I think Lindbergh even volunteered to try to serve during World War II,
Hmm.
after having been an America Firster. I believe that's true. But whatever the case, I think that that as a free market guy, I understand the desire for the internet to sort of be this libertarian utopia. But in hindsight, I think it was a mistake. I think we should have tried to replicate some of the regulations that we had with our sort of traditional media outlets, and we now we're paying the price for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I think sometimes when conservatives or Republicans use the word regulation, other conservatives or Republicans like cast them off and say, well, you can't say that, like that you're a liberal now. And it's like, well, not really. All life is chaotic. And in order for it to be stable, it requires some semblance of rules and order. And I think what's important is that you allow, kind of like Madison, right? It's Federalist number 10 is my favorite. It's probably my favorite thing to read. He talks about how factionalism is what breaks down governments and society. And in order to have a stable government, a lot of times back then, you would look for like a strong authoritarian monarchy that was virtuous, that would lead the people the right way, but that was temporary. And what he was trying to do is create a diverse republic where all the different factions of society got a debate. They got to have a say in writing the rules so everybody was on the same page. And I think we've gotten away from that in a lot of ways. The
Yep.
debate has always been like, no, my rights are universal. Everything that I think should be a right is now a right, and I don't want to discuss it with you. And it happens on the left and it happens on the right. And as conservatives and Republicans, we're watching our party just fall apart. And a lot of that is because we can't recognize the fact that our past leaders made some mistakes, and we should learn from them as opposed to, continuing the same mistakes.
Good lesson in life, in politics, and in parenting.
Well, Matt, I've really enjoyed this conversation, man. This has been great. You've for the audience out there, if you haven't read his books, where are they? You should read them. You say that you don't think that you'll write anything that'll be remembered, but I think you already have, and particularly Too Dumb to Fail. It was, as an adult, it was the first like adult book that I read late in my life. It really inspired me. I thought, man, this guy really understands what's going on. Very prophetic in that book. If people go back and read it now, they would be like blown away. And I think that generations to come will find this book, and it will be used to understand the current political discourse that we're going through. So first, I appreciate you writing it. Second, I appreciate the fact that you've just been so kind and generous, throughout our relationship, and just being respectful, responding to messages and stuff like that. You don't always get that in people in politics. Maybe that's why you weren't a campaign guy.
Exactly. Well, it's my pleasure, and it has been my pleasure. So, right back at you.
Yeah. So, thank you very much for joining the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Peace and love. Thank you to my guest, Matt Lewis. You can follow him on X at Matt K. Lewis. If you enjoyed this interview, remember to subscribe, like, and share. Peace and love.